Hi, everyone. As we're letting the last few folks into this meeting, you are in the right place if you're here for Cultivating Resilience in Youth with Deep Nature Connection. And we're going to get started here in a couple minutes with our presenter, JoAnn Yates. Just letting in the next few participants, and we'll do a brief introduction. In the meantime, on the screen, you'll see the Florida Horticulture for Health platform information. So we have several different means of sharing information and educating folks about therapeutic horticulture programming. And if you would consider subscribing to the network via the website, there's opportunity for monthly e-blasts, which are sent to subscribers, info about upcoming webinars. Our YouTube videos with webinars are all posted. You'll receive horticulture information and other interesting events related to how horticulture can positively impact health, which is what we're all here for. So good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Sterling on behalf of the Florida Horticulture for Health Network. I'm very pleased to present the Cultivating Resilience in Youth with Deep Nature Connection webinar. We have a wonderful presenter this evening, JoAnn Yates. And JoAnn delights in connecting children of all ages to the wonder, beauty, and awe of nature. For the past 14 years, she's served students of all abilities as a horticultural therapist in the school system, leading classes and designing a therapeutic garden for students from age 6 months to age 11. I had the pleasure of attending one of JoAnn's presentations at the National Children Youth Gardening Symposium. And so we're so excited to have her. She has been involved in the healing arts for 35 years. She's a certified healing touch practitioner and a 6th-year student of Wilderness Fusion, an earth-based healing school in North Carolina. She strongly believes that nature is the finest teacher, whether in healing the body, mind, or spirit. JoAnn is currently putting her professional career on pause as she deepens her own relationship to nature in the woods of North Carolina. We are so excited to have JoAnn Yates join us this evening, and I'm happy to turn it over to you, JoAnn.
Thank you, Sarah. I am delighted to be with you this evening. This webinar is focused on connections with ourselves, with those that we serve, and with nature. We do this work to support others, and yet it's our work too. This is a personal journey. It's a journey that can be filled with awe and wonder and joy. And the deeper that you go with building your own connections with nature, the more you're going to have to offer others. So today we're going to discuss ways to foster resilience in youth, creating a bridge to nature built on sensory awareness. Because truly we are bridge builders and seed planters. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like for you to just take a minute and recall a moment in nature that inspired awe and wonder in you. What was it about that moment that made it special? We're going to take a moment just to arrive right now, because I know we've all had busy days. So I just invite you to settle into your seat, get comfortable, and take a nice full breath. And maybe just one more. Your entire body is a portal into nature and its lessons in resilience. I'd like to read to you one of my favorite poems to get us started tonight. This is by Dane Anthony. It's entitled Right Here. Stop moving. Stand in one place, this place. Breathe slowly, in, then out, and repeat. Repeat again. Let your shoulders sink and relax. Unclench your jaw. Slowly close your eyes. Listen for your heartbeat. Really listen. Feel it pulsing your fingertips. Lessen expectations. Underdo all your efforts. Requisition the time for your soul to catch up. Lean into the wind. Feel it like a tree and test the ground. Learn to trust the resilience. It would be treason to move quickly left or right from this place. It is all right to be exactly what you are, who you are, where you are, right here, right now. In order to make connections and build our container tonight, it's important that we share the same language. So for this evening, we're going to define resilience as the capacity to recover from difficult life events. Usually it's thought to have two components, the inner strength and outer resources. And we as educators and mentors for youth become a very important component of that outer resources, the ways that we are supporting youth. Deep nature connection is a way of experience ourselves as part of the landscape and the deep connection that arises from such awareness. Contact with nature can improve our sense of well-being, emotional regulation, and restore the body from the effects of stress. So we talked about building a bridge, and the components that we're going to use tonight are connection, using an outward focus, daily positive routines, taking a break, learning self-care, moving towards goals, nurturing a positive self-view, which sometimes means mastering new skills, accepting change, and keeping things in perspective. Throughout this presentation, we're going to have a couple of those yeah, but moments. And this is our first one. I have to admit for myself, being in nature is my happy place. It's where I feel safe. It's where I feel connected. And I have to remember that that's not the case for everyone. So I want you to think about the populations that you serve and what barriers might be present for them. They may include accessibility, financial barriers, medical barriers, safety barriers, cultural barriers. I think we need to acknowledge that we're not all starting in the same place. And that way we can make better connections with those that we're serving. The invitation is to provide accesses to place in nature that provides youth with a new challenge and appropriate risks that foster positive self-esteem, persistence, and contribute to a sense of belonging, calm, and relaxation. So for the population that I served mainly, it was children with special needs, had a wide age range. And so part of our therapy garden, the way that we made it accessible and help remove some of the barriers, was just making sure that our pathways were wide, that the footing was solid, and that we had raised beds that were varying heights. We included pots. We had lots of different colors. We had quiet places to rest. And we definitely made sure that all our plant material was safe. Now, this might not be necessary for your population, but again, it's knowing your audience. Who are you serving? And how can you make it an inviting place to be? I have this question that is so very important. Are we part of nature? And if so, what part do we play? So the way that we answer this question shapes the way we see the world, and it shapes the way we teach young people. If we see ourselves as part of nature, then we join in the system and we feel connected and we enter into a relationship built on reciprocity. Building our relationships comes with cords of connection with any relationship, whether it be with nature, with loved ones, with our students, with our colleagues. We know that there's certain ingredients that are necessary. Taking time, giving our attention and presence, continuity, showing up, caring, and respect. Our senses provide our pathway into the connection. If we look at nature as something as an object, then we're just seeing it as a resource to be used. If we change our perspective and see nature as subject, it changes everything. It brings in that aspect that we can teach of caring and respect. And I dare say we can go a step further and just see nature as self, because we know that we're not separate from nature, we are nature. In this picture is helping young girl plant some seeds, and she had trouble using her hands for fine motor skills. And so we put the seeds in a shaker and it made it a little bit easier. You'll also notice the bed is quadrant off. So when I was working with the students, they knew where their square was. Again, this worked for the population that I was working with. Yours may be totally different. It's just some ideas. Our senses create a portal into the world of nature. And you can just see these young children were just holding up the butterfly there on some verbena. And you can just see the engagement. They're looking, they're reaching, they may be smelling to see if they can smell the flower. And it's just a wonderful way. Like, how do we find that one thing in nature that's going to spark attention? This is another yeah, but moment that we have to acknowledge, but we all have different ways of experiencing the world. And for some of our students that we're working with, we may need to teach them how to turn down the dial, because sometimes the input may be just too much. So I want to think about how we can do that with our students. I had one student, I noticed he was outside in the garden and he had his ears covered. And I asked him what was going on. And he said, the birds are singing. It's driving me crazy. And that gave me a clue that, okay, this is just like way too much input for him. I was enjoying it. He was not. So that's where we can bring in tools of, teaching our students to cover their ears, maybe having equipment, noise reducing earmuffs. There's just a lot out there, or maybe separating into a quieter spot. Again, just acknowledging we're all coming from a different place. Sound. This is our first step into nature. Nature sounds are associated with an increase in parasympathetic responses of rest and relaxation. Water sounds can increase positive outlook, and bird songs can lower stress. So we have some things that we can practice. The first thing that I notice when I see deer, except after I'm wondering what they're eating in my garden, because they come by every morning and evening, is I notice their ears. They're magnificent. They're prey animals, so sound is really, really important to them. So we can increase our hearing just like an ear by creating deer ears. So I invite you just to take your hands and cup them behind your ears. And since you're muted, you just go ahead and talk a little bit and see how, just by putting your hands around your ears, how you can change the sound input that you're getting. It's pretty incredible. And if that's just like too much input, well, we can cover up our ears. Another wonderful sound practice is a sit spot. This is a place that we go out in nature, hopefully every day, and just sit. First time that you go outside, you're going to be upsetting the baseline of nature. So things may be very, very quiet, but once you sit outside for about 5 minutes, the animals around you are going to start to ignore you, and you're going to pick up more and more input. I've done this with children where we'll go outside and we start out going very, very quietly, and we'll sit on a blanket and we're just quiet. Now, obviously, it depends on the age of your students. If I'm starting out with toddlers, if we get 30 seconds of quiet, that's awesome. And maybe I can just start pointing out some of the sounds in their area. Like, oh, did you hear that car go by? Or maybe there's a bird singing, or maybe there's another student talking. So it doesn't have to be just the birds singing. We can just develop awareness of all the things around us. So sit spot is a wonderful practice. Crows are fabulous at teaching us bird language. They're very expressive, they're very intelligent, and they have a wide language. So we can be outside and maybe in our sit spot, but just, maybe just outside and notice the sounds around us. If you're quiet enough in the spring, you may hear companion calling. So one bird is calling to its mate, and there's a call and response, and it's absolutely beautiful to hear. You may hear juveniles waiting for their food, and they're very insistent, a very different sound. And sometimes I was out yesterday and I was looking around at this bird. It was on a telephone wire, and it just seemed like it was singing for the joy of it. So can we tune in? Again, we're fine-tuning our sense of hearing. Can we listen more carefully? And a lot of times if I'm outside in the garden and I hear an alarm call, it causes me to look around, like maybe there's something I'm missing that I need to be aware of. Lots of fun, different sound practices. Sometimes the problem is like taking in too much sound. With my kindergartners, what I do in the beginning of the year is I show them a talking stick that I have made. And then we go outside and we look for sticks, probably 12 inches long is big enough. And we go back in. And the students have the choice of either leaving their stick plain or decorating them. It could be using markers or paint or wrapping them with yarn. And then we sit in a circle and I hold my talking stick. And we just review that the person with the stick is the one to talk. Everybody else's job is just to listen. That helps those or maybe that are very anxious to share to be able to quiet down, because I reassure them that we're going to pass the stick around and everyone is going to get a chance to say something. And of course, there's always that option. If you don't want to share, you don't have to. I did this with a large group of middle schoolers. End of the day, they're just full of energy and we're sitting in this circle. And I thought, oh, how's this going to work? And I was amazed because they quieted down. And then there were some students that hadn't spoken up earlier, kind of quiet. And they said, Miss JoAnn, can I have the stick? So it empowered them to know that the ground rules, that they were safe, that we were going to listen because they were holding the stick. So it's a wonderful practice. With older students, you can do a sound inventory, have them draw ahead and go outside and just keep track of the sounds that they hear. Write them down. Spend some time with that. And then maybe when you go back in the classroom, you can have them draw a larger head and quiet down, maybe with a few breaths. And ask them to listen to their internal voice. What are they telling themselves? A lot of times we're pretty harsh with ourselves, much harsher than we would be with other people, and we're not even aware of it. So it's a way of capturing those thoughts and bringing an awareness to it, and maybe having a discussion about how we can be kind to ourselves. Mark Nepo says to listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. Again, all these practices are to build awareness. So just think for a moment of what sounds do you find soothing and why? Knowing that we're all very different. You can do a sound inventory by writing down with your classroom or small groups sounds that people find soothing, and then some maybe that are stress inducing. And how can you use this information? How can you change your learning environment by taking in and maybe reducing the stress reducing sounds and introducing sounds that are more soothing? If we were together in a circle outside, which is the ideal way to do this talk, I would be passing around the basket right now. And you would have a choice to grab some instrument that you like, and we would just play with making sound. So I'd have drums and rattles, steel drums. I have ocean drums. I have thunder drums, rain sticks, and we have flutes. And again, how can we just have fun and engage in sound and then switch? And we can decide like, oh, I wasn't really into that drum, but I like the rattle. Oh, that's interesting. We can also remember that we have our own body that we can make sound with. Just by sighing, you can engage the parasympathetic system again for rest and relaxation. Why not have a big sighing party if you're just kind of, reading the room and you think, oh gosh, we need a break. So use sound to your advantage. It's so much fun growing sound. Try to grow as many gourds as I can, and we end up having a gourd band in one of the activities. A real easy one is to grow egg gourds. They make wonderful rattles once they dry, but any gourd will do. And it's really fun, and it brings the nature inside for you. We know that 70% of the input that we get comes in through our sight. 70%. We see with our eyes, of course. We see with our brain, the optic nerve. We can see with our heart. And I ask you, what does it mean to see with your soul? Think about that. What are ways that you can begin to see with your heart? What do I mean by that? I used to go into lots of different classrooms, and no matter how many years I have been doing this, every time I go into that classroom, it's a little bit different. And so I'd always pause kind of at the threshold and take a moment to kind of read the room. It might be what I would see or hear, but a lot of times it was what I felt like, ooh, somebody's having a bad day and it's affecting everybody else. How can I use that information to change what's going on? How can I use my own voice to change? If things are chaotic, can I be a little bit quieter, almost whisper when I read the story to gather in the students? Or if people are just falling asleep, can I just be really animated, jump around, and again, use my body to keep attention? There's lots of different practices that we can use using our sight. We'll talk about a couple of them tonight. We'll go through I notice and owl eyes, morning offerings, nature buddies. Again, we talked a little bit about that sit spot and scavenger hunts. This is an incredible time of year with the leaves changing to engage our sense of sight with our students. The first practice, Sarah and I did this at the conference that we met at, was called I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of, and maybe you're familiar with it. It's a wonderful icebreaker, and it's also great if you have a big group and you want to break down into smaller groups. So you can go outside and ask your group to go out and collect things, being mindful of where you're at. I try to encourage the students to find things that are on the ground so they're not picking things randomly. And then pair up and share what you found. Using these statements, first starting out with I notice. We begin by making an observation. An observation is something that we perceive through our senses. It's not an opinion or an identification. So I may pick up a leaf and say, oh, I notice the leaf is green, and maybe my partner has a leaf and say, oh, there's a hole in my leaf. Just an observation. Then we go to, I wonder. We're taking turns again, creating that bond and that connection with each other and nature. I wonder who ate the plant. I wonder how that hole was made. And finally, it reminds me of, that leaf reminds me of Swiss cheese or whatever. You get the idea. The book, How to Teach Nature Journaling, has wonderful ideas, and I'd highly recommend it. I love to bring in the animals, of course, and we're talking right now about owl eyes. So I invite you to stretch your arms out and wiggle your fingers. Slowly move them closer until you can pick them up with your peripheral vision. Now you're in owl eyes. Owl eyes is right-brained. It's using wide angle vision. This is the vision where we can sense movement the best. So if we are in our sit spot, we can go into wide angle vision and we can see movement. It's also a great way to relax your eyes if you've been focused. So we can go from owl eyes outside or even in the classroom to eagle eyes. You're putting your fingers right in front of you and just focusing in on what is right in front of you. Left brain, focus vision. We're connecting the right brain and the left brain, going back and forth. And we go back and forth, shifting from owl eyes to eagle eyes. We call it splattered vision. You see totally different. And it's just a fun exercise. And most people really get into that. There's a wonderful book I'd highly recommend you checking out called Morning Altars. It's by Day, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but we can get that for you. It's a whole book about this man who went out in nature and randomly collected things and made beautiful arrangements, morning offerings. With this practice, when I do it with my students, we sit down in a circle first and we have ground rules of what can be picked and what can't, trying to have as few limitations as possible. And then also going through that nature as subject, not object. Can you go up to a plant and ask, is it okay if I take your leaf? Pause and listen. Now, people kind of start this practice and think, you're a little bit crazy, JoAnn, but it's amazing when you stop and pause. Sometimes you'll really have this sense, of course, you're not hearing it, but the sense like, no, I don't want my leaves picked today. And other times the plants are like, yeah, I'm really into this. Let's do it. So you can gather up your materials. You can pre-gather if you need to have a little bit more control of your space, and have the students on a piece of paper or just on the ground curate these arrangements. And if you want, you can take pictures of them and leave them there. And what you'll notice the next day is either, they've started to wither, or maybe someone has kicked them, or they've been rained on. It teaches impermanence. It brings us to the moment. What is happening right now? What can I enjoy? I was in a class one time and we were asked to get a nature buddy, someone that we could share nature with. And so I asked my oldest daughter, because I knew she would be into this and everybody else would probably think I was a little bit crazy. So I said, do you mind if we just share what we see out in nature every day? And so she lives 2 hours away. So we would text each other, usually in the morning from our morning walk, and share pictures. It was a wonderful way for me to feel connected to my daughter, to connected to her environment, like where she went every day, and like, what was her eye drawn to? And that year on Mother's Day, she surprised me. She compiled all our pictures that we sent into a book. And it was the sweetest, most thoughtful gift. And I went from being so hesitant, thinking, oh, who am I going to ask to be my nature buddy, to creating this wonderful connection with my daughter. And we still do it. It's been a couple of years now. You can send pictures, you can draw pictures. It just depends on the resources you have. So just being creative. There's a great site, teacherspayteachers.com. Maybe you're familiar with it. For a low price, a couple dollars, you can get permission to print off different things for scavenger hunts. They have all different things of either to be mindful, things to taste, colors, and it's just really fun, and it makes it easy. It's ready made. With my younger students, what I do is I go in the garden, I take pictures and I laminate them, and I use them as cue cards. So then we can go around. It just depends on what age that you're working with. I delighted last winter when we had a little bit of snow in North Carolina, and I finally could see animal tracks. And finally, it made so much sense of what my dog was doing in the morning, because she would take the circuitous path. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm kind of in a hurry. I need to go to work. What's going on? And then finally, on the snowy morning, I could see, she could smell what I couldn't. And finally, I could see what her world was like. Tracking things brings us very much into that present moment. It makes us a tourist in our own backyard. So I highly recommend it. Remember that not everything has to be pretty, right? I like to have ooey gooey things in the garden to talk about, because life's not always pretty. You can always expand this to different metaphors depending on your population and who you're working with. And it's a way to get real, right? Like, because we can talk about things that are so beautiful out in nature, but you know what? Sometimes things are kind of harsh, and sometimes life is kind of harsh. So we need to bring that in as well. Take a moment and just think about what scenes in nature bring you joy. And how can you bring more of that into your life? We're moving on to taste and smell. Taste evokes memories and affects our mood. In March of every year, I would make a big poster board filled with different seeds that plants that we could grow in the garden. So all the students had a choice. And I always picked things that I knew that would grow well and that hopefully the kids would be excited about. You can see we have a lot of excitement here. And then to make it more real for our younger learners, bringing in like carrots and peppers and squash so they could actually feel, because sometimes just seeing a picture of something makes no sense. And we would end that activity with doing a planting inside, usually wheatgrass, because it grows so well that the students could care for and watch grow. Older students could measure it and do different experiments with. How can you use taste and smell to build connections with the folks that you work with? How can you build cords of relationship just by the food that you choose? I don't know if any of you have grown moonflower. It's one of my favorite flowers, and you have to get up really close to it to take in the scent. It's absolutely wonderful. I have a memory of when my children were young. I would plant moonflowers on our front railing, and they would bloom at night. And when the bloom opened up, we would go out and smell them, and we'd pick them, and I'd put them on their nightstand. And I told them, you know, the flowers are opening in the nighttime. It's time for bed. And in the morning, when the flower closes, it's time to wake up. This bought me a couple hours of sleep, guys. It worked beautifully. But the coolest thing now is that my daughters that are in their 30s are growing moonflowers themselves. And they're sending me pictures of them. And it's just this wonderful connection that we built years and years ago. So our sense of smell is always active, and it really has the ability to anchor us in the moment. How do you explore the sense of smell with the ones that you mentor? And what are some of your successes? Again, not everything has to smell pretty. A lot of times we'll just be digging in the earth and I get various reactions. Or if I'm spreading mulch, some people love it. Some people really are not really happy with me. I think it causes conversation. Conversation is connection. That is awesome. Many, many, many different taste and scent activities. And we'll talk about a few of them. Plant meetups. You probably have done sachets with different herbs, or made tea pouches. That works really great with older students. Sharing memories and creating new and positive experiences in the garden using taste and scent. So my kindergarten class, I usually begin the year by buying a bunch of herbs, and I've cleared out a bed for them, and they get to pick their plant. And for those that aren't really into the herbs, I also make sure that I have some things that are blooming that will bloom pretty much through the year. They get to pick their plant, they get to um, taste it, look at it, and then they plant it. And now we have something that we can take care of throughout the year that's theirs. And when it's time for them to graduate at the end of the year, we dig up their plant and they get to take it home. So it's building connections. And if a plant dies, that creates more conversation, like what happened here. And I always make sure to have spares so there's not any broken hearts here. But it's a really wonderful way, because if it's your plant, if you have ownership, then you care a little bit more. If budget is tight, some years I just have seeds, or I get donations, or we start with cuttings. There's lots of different ways to do this. What are ways that you introduce taste and scent to those that you mentor? Moving on to touch. Our skin both connects us to the world through our sensations, and it acts as a barrier to protect us. This is another yeah, but moment, because for a lot of people with sensory integration issues that are tactile defensive, touch can be really, really scary. So again, just a reminder, we're not all starting out in the same place. So we need to think about how can we entice someone to touch. And something that I do is always give choice. I think that's really, really important. And sometimes if someone is curious but is not ready to touch, I let them watch me touch it. In this, we have, I love making Metamucil slime. It's a great product. It's cheap to make, and it's non-toxic. So if someone accidentally ingests it or ingests it on purpose, there's no harm done, and it feels really gross. So it's really good. So this sweet little girl is just thinking, not real sure about this, but I'm going to give it a try, which is awesome. Again, going back to scavenger hunts, a great way to introduce touch. Teacherspayteachers.com is a great way to have ready-made sheets that you can just check off and use with your students if you're not able to make your own cue cards. And I invite you to take yourself out on a nature scavenger hunt and just see what catches your eye as an adult. It's just so much fun, and sometimes we forget to do this for ourselves. An activity that I like to do with all ages is planting with intention. So I give everyone a small piece of paper, and if it's a younger student, I ask them to draw a picture of something that makes them happy, and so they draw their picture. If the student is a little bit older and is able to write, I ask them to write maybe something that has made them sad, something they need to share with somebody, but they don't really have that person to talk to, or something that made them really happy and excited. Write that down on the paper. With even older folks, I might say writing down a memory that you cherish, or if it's appropriate, something you want to let go of, something that you've been holding on to that's just not working for you anymore. We plant that piece of paper on the bottom of a little pot that the kids have decorated, and then we put in either seeds or a seedling. And every time that they water that plant, I ask them to think about what was on their piece of paper. Again, nurturing that connection. Remember barriers. So this young fellow, his arms were amputated above his elbows and on his legs above his knees. So for him to be able to be without his prosthetics was a very freeing thing. They were a little bit uncomfortable, and he was getting used to them. So the teacher there just put him right in the digging box, and he was happy as could be. It made it accessible. You can see his friend looking on there, and she had another area that she could reach more easily. How do we make things accessible? If I did nothing else at the school of merit, my favorite thing was the digging beds, and we had them all over. We know that having contact with soil increases our serotonin levels, our feel-good hormones. It allows us to have open-ended play. If someone's having a bad day, we can take them out to the digging bed alone, and they can get rid of some of their pent-up aggression or energy. It's just a wonderful thing, and it's just so simple. Here we just have rocks that are on the ground and filled in with soil. And you can tell this area was well used because there's hardly any grass. We also added a play kitchen when we got some grant money. You know, that's fine, but you don't really need that. It's just playing in dirt is just so much fun. Of course, adding water makes it all the more better. We grew sweet potatoes, and we had them in a container, and the kids took care of them for the season. And then we just dumped out the whole container so they could use their sense of touch and smell and discover the sweet potatoes. And it was just so awesome. This was like my favorite kind of scavenger hunt for them. And then they got to take the sweet potatoes home and eat them. So again, going full circle and making connections. Maybe you have a soft piece of grass or area, ground where you teach with your youth that they can take their shoes off. There's whole books written on earthing and grounding. And we don't have time to go into that right now, but just the simple act of making contact with our feet on the ground, automatically all our sensors light up. Is it cold? Is it wet? Is it damp? Is it hard? Do I feel like walking on this? Do I want to get off of it? It just lights up our sensories, soundboard. So I would highly recommend, if you can, going out and being barefoot. It keeps us in sync with the earth. It's very simple. How can we develop awareness around how we touch others, both physically, emotionally, and energetically, and how we touch the earth? It's a big question. What are some ways that you connect youth through nature, through touch? How do you model your own touch with those that you're working with? Favorite activity that I have with the kids is we raise worms, and so bringing out the worms, and we have the kids gather up their banana peels and apple cores for a couple weeks, and then we start out the activity by playing with the Metamucil slime, getting them used to that kind of slick feeling. Then I bring out worms, rubber worms that I bought from Walmart, like fishing worms, for them to practice gentle touch. Because it's really important to me, if I'm going to have them touch real worms, that we don't have too many disasters. I mean, accidents happen, but I want to make sure that the worms are as safe as possible. So we've practiced gentle touch. And once I feel confident that they can touch the worms gently, then I give them that opportunity. If they don't want to, that's fine. They can just watch the worm. So it's a great way to practice touch with your children. Whole body experiences. We've been talking separately about our senses. We've gone over the 5 senses. We know that there's way more than 5, but we're limiting it to that this evening. This is information that builds and builds and builds. So let's bring it together a little bit with a whole body experience. We can do a body scan meditation, just simply sitting quietly and checking in with our body. How do we feel? And you can lead this very easily, going through the head, the shoulders, the torso, the legs, the feet. It can turn into, after checking in with your body, noticing what is maybe tight or tense that needs to move. You can have a dance party. Just put on some fun music and dance away. It's a great way to create awareness with your whole body. Heart math has wonderful activities that do connecting with your heart. Some is simply, and you can do this right now as we're together, just placing your hand on your heart, becoming aware of your breath. slowing down and thinking of something that you're grateful for. Lots and lots of studies how this affects not only our heart rate, but our brain waves, getting into that quiet state. That's something that you can do with your classroom if there's some agitation or if people are just having a hard day. Core routines, we've talked about some of them. Animal charades and shaking and womping. Shaking and womping is so much fun. We'll do a little bit of that right now because we've been sitting for a little bit. But right in your place, just shake your arms out. Just wiggle any way that you need to do. If you need to stand up, that's absolutely fine. And just wiggle. If you need to make sound, great, go for it. Womping is just gently tapping your body. Again, it's a great way to become present, waking up your body, getting rid of tension if you've been sitting for a while. I like to do nature charades with the kids and simply have some stones that I've written words on. Maybe you can see that, worm or fish. So I have each student take a stone out of the bag without showing anybody else. They pair up, and then we do charades. So like, how would you act out being a turtle? And then the other person, you don't tell them obviously who you are, but you have your turn and then you swap and you can go back and forth. It's a great way to bring in movement, yes, and bringing in your whole body, but it's also a great way to start gathering respect. Like, what's it like to be a turtle? You know, I got to get really low on the ground. What does a turtle see? What would catch a turtle's eye? So you can build on this activity. There's lots of different things that you can order online if you don't want to make your own. I find the stones work just as well, but if you need ideas, that is just fine. Bringing it all together, there's a wonderful book, maybe you know it, called Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature. And John Young is the main author, goes through some of these things that we've talked about and has added so much more. So if you want more information, I would highly recommend his book. He goes into sit spots, the importance of storytelling. Again, you can bring in your talking stick while you're doing that. Listening to bird language. Intuitive wandering, just going out for a walk with no destination in mind, just kind of following what catches your eyes. Tracking, body radar, awe and gratitude, sensory expansion. There's just so much that we can do. So just as a review, as we start to wrap up, what we're trying to do is build a nature bridge to resilience. And some of the building tools that we have is to make connection with ourselves, with others, and with nature. By helping self, by helping others. Positive daily routines that we can do for ourselves and our students and those that we serve. Taking a break, allowing time, kind of microdosing with nature. If you don't have a half an hour to go out for a long walk, take 5 minutes, take 2 minutes. Learning self-care, moving towards goals, which helps build focus. Nurturing positive self-views. How can we help our students master new skills? Accepting change. Again, including those things outside that maybe are going through their life cycle so they can watch the full cycle of change. We all go through this. It doesn't matter the age of your student, old or young. And keeping things in perspective. Developing a broader long-term outlook. So these are all ways that we can build a bridge towards resilience. As a reminder, creating and building a relationship takes time. It takes attention and presence, really being there in the moment. Continuity, coming back again and again. Caring and respect. These are all important components of any kind of relationship that you're trying to build. I want to share with you a poem called Clearing. Do not try to serve the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to the world so worthy of rescue. We have time for questions. And I believe, Sarah, this is the time that maybe they'll be put in the chat. And if you can help me with that, that would be great. If you have any specific questions about reading material or things that we talked about, my email address is there, and I'm happy to respond to anything that might have come up for you. So thank you so much.
JoAnn, thank you so much. I'm so honored to round out my day in this way. I have the sense that many of our participants feel the same way. If anyone has a question or something that they think would be valuable to the group, we're happy to view those in the chat. So we'll take a few moments and see if anyone wants to ask anything or say anything in the chat.
Okay, we have a few questions coming in. Shall I read them?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Bianca asks, are there in-service opportunities?
That is a great question. It may be something that if there's specific questions and if there's enough interest through this format, that maybe we can continue this conversation geared more specifically to whatever population that you're working with. So that would be up to the Florida Horticultural Group.
And Robin asks, with this age group, how long do your groups usually last?
Great question. Okay, so in the introduction, Sarah mentioned that I work with children age 6 months to age 11. And so with the younger ones, what I'm really trying to get them to do is to get used to another human being. And so I do a lot of show and tell. In the beginning of the year, in September, if we get 10 minutes, it's success because they're young and they're wiggly. And so it builds. So even though I may be doing a similar activity with each age group, if we get to toddlers, they usually are pretty good for 20 minutes in September. Now, it's so gratifying by May because then they're asking for more and more. And, if we're not outside, they ask to go outside. But it varies. And I really pay attention and I stop when I can tell that attention is drifting because I want it to be fun. I want them to be engaged and I want to follow where their sparks lead them. And obviously with older groups an hour, when I've done this with middle schoolers or high schoolers, an hour to 2 hours, particularly for rotating activities, works fine. So it's knowing your population.
And I have some separate chats. It looks like I can view different ones than you, Jessica. Susan Morgan would like to know, do you have a routine or ritual that you have to start each program or end each program with?
That's a great question. And that depends on who I'm with. So it varies greatly. If I'm with wee little ones, I try to come in pretty quietly so as not to startle them and to gently bring out and entice. So I'm not sure, I'm going to be that person that holds up things that you can't see on the webinar, but this is a crow and he's absolutely awesome. So I try to bring in things that they might have interest in to get their attention. Butterfly might be a little bit easier to see. So with the little ones, as we get older, what has worked for my population that I have worked is reading a story. So today we started with a poem, and with my group, I would read a short story that they would introduce whatever we're talking about. Because as a horticultural therapist, with the work that I'm doing, I'm connecting them with nature, but there's a reason behind it. I may be trying to develop fine motor skills, standing balance. There's a lot of different behind the scene things that we're working on while we're making it fun. And so for them, I have found that reading a book creates that moment of focus. I tried singing. I have a lousy voice, and so that didn't work so well. But I mean, singing, engaging children in song and movement is absolutely wonderful. Older groups, sharing a short story or maybe sharing a word so we all connect, so everybody feels seen and heard. So those are just a few ideas.
JoAnn, Bridget is giving you a big thank you and says she feels relaxed and reinvigorated. She's wondering if you've worked with participants on the spectrum, and if so, are there specific senses perhaps that you would recommend, or suggestions that you might have for individuals with spectrum disorders?
Bridget, I'm glad you're feeling relaxed, and that's a big question. Every child, whether they're on the spectrum or not, is an individual. And so what I try to do is learn from the teachers, because they're with them all day long, and also kind of ask parents, like, what are their special interests? Because it varies so much. So I've had little ones that are really interested in dinosaurs. And so out in the garden, I had large plastic dinosaurs that we kept out as a way of connecting. So I can connect into their world. So what I'm trying to do is enter into their world. And sometimes, even though I love nature, that might not be the best place for them to start. And so I would love to give you a specific, these are the 5 things I do. We're all individuals. And it's just so finding out, watching and observing, kind of feeling in what is going to work with the child. And then, being willing to fail all the time, of pushing a little bit too much or not pushing enough, losing somebody, and then trying again and again and again. That continuity, like I'm with you. We're going to find something that we're, some ground that we can connect on. So I know that's very vague, but that's really, you just have to kind of feel into it.
Jessica, did you have other questions? I have one more here that I know I can share, but I think you're seeing different things than I'm seeing.
Yes, that might be. Someone asked if we're going to post this recording, and yes, that is the intention. We'll send a link to everyone, and it will be on our webpage. And then there's another question. Sean is in Ohio and they have a very short growing season. What, if anything, do you do during the non-growing seasons? Maybe at times when people are snowed in.
Great question. And that's why I love worms, because that's what I pull out in the winter. So we're in January, we're talking about worms, and through that lesson, we're also talking about recycling. So it builds and builds and builds. We're doing a lot with slime. Snails are awesome if you can, have a habitat for them before it snows, and watch them and watch their snail trails. Again, as a horticultural therapist, I'm trying to do things also that is including their IEP goals that they're working on. We also use winter as a time to take care of our animals. So we do the, ubiquitous pine cone. We use lard because we have peanut allergies, smother that with lard and have the kids put raisins and seeds, and then we put that outside, and we have a whole lesson on birds. Another lesson that we do after, we feed the birds, so we're building that connection. We can watch them. Luckily, the classrooms overlooked the outdoor area, which was great. We could also then do a whole lesson on birds and what they eat and where they nest and create nests. So, and then from that, which is like, blows my mind when you're working with kids with special needs, and to talk to them about how a bird builds a nest without hands, you know, and like we try to give that a try. Like, can you just use your mouth and try to build a nest? As an adult, I mean, I'm just like so in awe of how birds do this. And then we practice. So we, again, I mentioned wheatgrass. By March, we're usually ready to start practicing being a gardener. So there's so many things that we can start. And even if you're doing beans in a Ziploc bag, right, you're not going to be able to put them out in the garden, but they get to see that process, that wonder of seeing the roots and the stems and that whole life cycle. So those are a couple of things that we do. There's so much more depending on your population. That, you know, rocks, you can, you know, gather up rocks, you can gather up going and looking at bark, do bark rubbings, just collecting things in nature, having a nature table that maybe you've started early in the year, but that you can use it in the winter.
JoAnn, thank you so much for those ideas. I will put a little plug in here and say early 2024, January or February, keep an eye out for a webinar that the Florida Horticulture for Health Network will be sponsoring, with all kinds of ideas for those of us stuck inside in winter or in poor weather. So that will be another upcoming webinar. If you have specific questions for JoAnn that were unable to be answered tonight, please do feel free to jot down her email address that's on the screen right now. And again, we'll be posting this presentation, the recording of the presentation, to YouTube for future reference. We thank everyone for joining us, and a big thanks to JoAnn. I'm always so moved and inspired by your work and your teaching, and I always walk away with ideas that I know that I'm going to use later this week with my students. So really glad to have you present with us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I hope everyone has a safe and